So I'm going to go ahead and get started and create a new Django app or new Django project. Just clear some stuff. All right. Whoop. So I'm going to zoom in right here. I'm going to open up CD, desktop, November or CP challenges, November. Cool. Cool. So the first thing I'm going to do is just create a directory called make. So what we're going to do is create the back end of a Django project that allows us, and a Django app that allows us to store different varieties of wine. So we're just going to have, a wine table that just stores some information on some wine, and we're able to update that wine, delete wines, all of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a directory called wine project. So I'm just going to create a directory called wine project. I'm going to CD into the wine project directory, and I'm going to open that directory into a new VS Code window.
Do you mind making that just a little larger?
Yep. All right. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right. So how do I create a new Django project?
npm start.
You need a virtual
Django.
environment.
Sorry, I heard a few people.
You need a virtual environment.
All right. So first I need a virtual environment, right? So I'm going to, what's the command to create a virtual environment in Python? I know it's been a few weeks. Anybody?
Python-m venv and then the name of the environment.
Yep. Python-m. So Python make virtual environment and then the name of the virtual environment, venv. So created a virtual environment, created this directory, it's creating it. Now I need to go into my virtual environment. What's the command to go into my virtual environment?
Source bin, the name of the environment.
Yep. So source venv bin activate. So I'm currently in my virtual environment. So now I'm in my virtual environment. I don't really have anything installed in my virtual environment. And what two libraries should I install if I want to use Postgres?
Django Encyclopedia.
Yep. So pip, not pop, pip install Django and Cycob G2. So I'm installing both of those. All right. All right. All right, cool. So I'm going to clear the terminal down here. Now I'm going to actually start a new Django project. So if you recall, the command to start a new Django project is Django-admin start project. And we're going to call this project a wine, or we're going to call it wine API, because we're actually creating an API similar to the third-party APIs that we've been working with in the past month or so. So wine underscore API dot or period, because I don't want to. So here we go. So we've got our wine API, we've got our manage.py file. So we have our settings, everything. What questions do you have so far about creating a new Django project and that whole process?
I have a question. Does naming it API as opposed, is that strictly does that change the?
Nope. No, I just called it that just because that's what we're kind of going to be using this. We can call it whatever we want, just like we have in the past. So I'm just calling it just to say, hey, this is how our way, it's going to be like an API for our backend. I could call it wine underscore backend that could also make a little more sense because it's like the back end of our application, but I'm just calling it Wine API. All right, so we created a Wine API project. Now let's actually go ahead and create our Wine application. So Python manage.py, and we're going to create a new Django app within our Wine API project. Start app, I'm going to call this one Wines. So it's plural. I'm just going to close that. There we go. So Python manage.py, Wines. Now if I open up there, we have our Django project and we have our Wines app. So what's the first thing we generally should do after we create a Django project and then create an app, a Django app?
Add the app to your settings.
Perfect. Yeah, we don't want to forget that. It's a very common thing we forget occasionally. I'm going to just delete all this just to keep it, bring that up top. So I'm coming down here into installed app, and I'm going to install Wines. Someone doing construction. Cool. All right, and now we're using Postgre or Postgres. Yeah, not Postgre. We're using Postgres. So let's go ahead and create a Postgres database. So I'm coming down here to databases in my settings.py file, and instead of using a SQLite, we're going to be using Postgres. And what should we call this database? Anybody?
Wine API.
All right, Wine API. Cool. So let's just go ahead and actually create a Wine API database in the terminal. So how do I create a SQL database in the terminal?
Create DB.
Create DB, one word, and then followed by, oh, looks like there already is one. So I'm going to drop that database. Drop DB, Wine API, so I can go ahead and create that database again. Cool. So now I've got, and I can test that. If I create PSQL Wine API, I'm in Wine API. I can see that it's actually in fact created. Cool. All right. So we've created our settings, our database. We attached our Wines app to our settings.py file. We were saying, or we attached a Postgres database. We created that database as well. Great. So now in our Wines app, let's go ahead and create our model. So it's a pretty simple one. We're just going to create a class wine models.model. So it inherits the model class from the Django database module. And we're going to have like the wine name equals models dot char field max length 255. Let's just say that. All right. So we've got our wine name. We can have the price of the wine, models dot char field max length.
Typo there on models, Tom.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Max length. Let's just say it's 10. We're going to say varietal. So what kind of wine? Is it a red, white? No. We'll also have models dot char field max length 255. This all should be like a little refresher for you. And also to say description models dot char field. Actually, let's make this one a text field. So text fields could be longer than 255, and we don't explicitly have to pass in the max length argument for a text field. All right, and then down here, let's do def under string, so we can actually print it out. Self dot return self dot the wine name. Just so if we ever print out an instance of a wine, we just display the wine name instead of the wine object. Cool.
Could you also, just for recap, do a really simple relationship to show us how that would work? Because I've been trying to mess around with the relationships and it's still giving me issues for like cascading delete. So like
Yep.
maybe we could do like a vineyard and do a relationship to wine.
We'll do that later, but not in this current lecture. So we can cover that at a later time. But yeah, but we will do a relationship. But yeah.
Hey, Tom,
Yep.
a really convenient, what's it called? VS Code extension called Code Spell Checker, like I downloaded and like points out whenever I spelled something wrong, which is pretty cool. And then like it can fix it for you and stuff like that, just in case. I don't know.
Sweet.
It
Yeah, you
saves me
should.
errors.
What is it? Code spell checker?
Yeah, Code Spell Checker.
All right. Yeah, do you want to post that in the November's channel just so everyone can kind of have access to it?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks for saying.
All right. So now we've created our models. Let's go ahead and create some routes. Whoop. Oh, let's just delete that. And so when we go ahead and create our routes, we need to include, and we can do path. Let's just go to wines / and we'll include the wines.urls as well. So created the URLs within the wine API project right here. Now inside of the wines, we need to create urls.py as well. So in here, from Django.urls, import path. And then usually we want to do from period import all of our views. I'm just going to copy this over, URL patterns, like so. And the first path we want to go to is just /wines, which will grab all of our wines. So we can do our views, wine list, which will grab all of our wines, a list of wines. Then we'll do the name wine list. Then the next one would be, to create a new wine. And we could say, hey, new wine. It's one URL. And then if we want to go to a very specific wine, so an individual wine, we could do int wine ID. And then this would be the wine detail view. And then you can edit a wine. Edit wine. And then the last one we usually will have is delete. What questions do you have about the routes that we created? So we're listing all of the wines. We're able to create a new wine. We just go to the wine detail page. We can edit that wine and we can delete that wine. So yeah, what questions do you have? Is this sort of a kind of a review? Are you starting to remember this a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like I know this better than React right now.
Okay, it's good. All right, so we created all the different views that we're going to need. So let's go ahead and actually create some views.
I have a question actually before
Yep.
we where did wine_list get defined?
We haven't actually created that yet. So we haven't created that yet. So that's what we're going to do now. So this is going to be in our views. And that's what we're going to define right now. So, so typically when in our views, we would return a render, and that render would return the request as well as would render that HTML template, as well as whatever data we want to inject into that HTML template. But we're not returning an HTML template anymore because we're going to be wanting to return a JSON, something like this. This is kind of what we want to return to our front end. So our front end, our React front end could do something with this data. So instead of rendering this, what we're going to want to do is from Django.http import JSON response. So instead of returning a render, we're going to return a JSON response. We're going to need some other things, import some other items from Django.views, decorators, CSRF, import CSRF exempt. So who recalls when you're submitting a form in an HTML template that we need that CSRF token in line in the HTML? Does anybody remember that? Yay, nay?
Yes.
Cool. So we're not actually going to be submitting through an HTML template anymore. So when we go to create a new wine or edit a wine or anything like that, it's not going to have a CSRF token attached to that. So we need some way to override Django's ability to check whether or not there's a CSRF token. So we're going to need this CSRF decorator that will prevent Django from looking for a CSRF token.
Is there going to be a replacement for that in React?
No. So you're not going to be having a CSRF token going forward. That's still okay because you can have front end validation as well as validation for your database. So it's not 100% required. So from forms, we're going to need a form for our wine. And this is something we're going to have to create at some point. We're going to create a WineForm. We're going to need our models, our wine model. From is it models, import wine. We're also going to need something. This is the new part of what you're going to have to be implementing in Django. So before we were just returning, in a view, we would return render, the request. So some view. So inside some view, we would return the render, the request, the wine, some HTML template. And then some data, right? Does everyone remember we would return a data object, or I'm sorry, a Python object to pass into our HTML template?
Yep.
So right now we can't do that. So we can't return a Python object we can't return a Python object through an HTTP request. So what we're going to need to do is serialize that wine query set and turn it into a Python object, and then this JSON response will turn it into a JSON JavaScript object notation. So when over here, we would have wine equals wine.objects.all. So that would get all of the wine objects, or all wines. It would be objects.all. And then this data, all wines. All wines. So this all wines would be a query set from Django's ORM, but we can't send a query set through the HTTP. So we need to convert this all wines into a Python object. And then we pass this Python object into a JSON response that will then get pushed through the HTTP request. And in order to turn these all wines query set into a Python object, we're going to need to serialize it. So we want to separate that from the views. So we're going to create from .serializers. So we're going to create another file called serializers. Serializers, import a wine serializer. And this wine serializer, its sole responsibility is to take a query set of like all wines and just return it as a Python object. So what questions do you have about that? And we're going to cover that. We're going to go through that whole process.
And the reason why you want to do that in a separate file is just to kind of separate your logic.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we're also going to need to, go ahead.
So the serializers turn it from a query set object to a Python object, but then we still need to turn it into a JSON JavaScript object.
Yep. But that's what the JSON response class will do that for us automatically. All right. And the last thing we'll need to do is import a JSON, which is a Python module. All right. So those are the three, or those are like the half a dozen things we need to import. So
Can I ask?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So why do we need to import JSON and JSON response? Like, is there like a?
Yeah, we'll get to that. So the JSON response is what we're returning, but the JSON is what's going to happen to turn a post request into a JSON, or essentially into a Python object. So it's going to be able to turn JSON into a Python object. All right, so let's go ahead and create this first view, this wine list. So def wine list. This wine list takes in the request as normal. Then pretty much everything is relatively the same. We want to grab all the wines equals wine.objects.all, kind of like what I just did. But now we're going to want to pass this wine object into this wine serializer. So we can say serialized wines equals wine serializer. And we're going to pass all the wines in there. And on this wine serializer class, we're going to have a method called all wines. And we're going to, after I do this, we're going to actually go ahead and create that wine serializer. And then we're going to return that JSON response. Data equals serialized wines. And we can just say like status equals 200. So it's a status code of 200, which is a successful status code. All right. Any questions?
So the JSON response is essentially returning the request or the response.
Correct. And it's turning that data into a JSON format.
Is there a reason we need the data equals? You can't just put serialized wines.
I think that's just how the JSON response.
Okay.
Yep. So now, as I said, we're going to need to create a wine serializer class from a serializers file. So inside of our wines, on the same level as our models, our URLs, and our views, we're going to create a serializers. Is that how you spell it? Serial.py file.
Spell check app will tell you if you're spelling it right.
There you go. So this is where our we're going to create our WineSerializer class. And the only thing we need to import in here is import object. So now we're going to create our WineSerializer class. So class WineSerializer, and that inherits from the object class or the object attribute. So this WineSerializer, so this is just like a regular normal class. What do we usually have when we create a class in object-oriented programming?
Dunder init.
Yep. So let's do def dunder init. That takes in self. And what we pass into the WineSerializer right here is a query set of wines. And we can call this whatever we want. We can call it wines, but let's just call it body for right now because it can be a single wine or it can be multiple wines. It could be a bunch of different stuff, but I'm just going to call it body for right now. Just for, it's a generic word or generic parameter. And then we need to create a instance variable of the self.body equals body. And that's pretty much it for right there. But we also have this all wines attribute. So I'm going to say def all wines. That takes in self and the output. So let's just create a variable called output equals an object that has wines. And initially it's an empty list. So we have an object that has wines, and this list is going to be a list of wines. So this body.
Your indentation's off.
My indentation's off.
Line 7
Oh,
needs
thank you. Thank you. So if this, I should bring this over here. So this is a query set of a list of wines. It's like an array of wines. And we pass that into the body. We assign that query set of wines to self.body. And now we need to extract all the wine like details from each individual wine and make it into a wine object. Or I'm sorry, a Python object. So if this right here, this wines gets passed in the body, gets assigned to a self.body variable. So it's an array. So if I need to loop through an array and extract all the wine details and assign it to a Python object, and then push that Python object into this array. So I can say like for wine in self.body, because again, self.body is a list of wines. I'm going to create wine details object. And I'm just going to say, hey, wine name equals wine.wine name. I can also say the price is the wine.price. And the varietal is the wine's varietal. And then just like description, wine.description. So I created a wine variable. I extracted the wine name, price, and varietal and the description out of an individual wine in the wine list. And then after that, I'm going to do output wines append the wine detail. I think it should be wine details. And at the very end, when I done looping through that query set of a list of wines and appending all the wine details to this list. At the very end, it breaks out of that loop, and then I just want to return the output. Questions on this process? What questions do you have about that?
Why are you looping through self.body instead of self or for wine and object? Because we're passing in the wines, right? As object, that's our parameter.
No, right here, this wine
Yes.
serializer is this body, which is a list of wines. It's a query set. It's a list of wines. So when we call all wines, we're looping through that list of wines. And so for each individual wine in that list, we're extracting the wine name, price, varietal, and description, and assigning it to this individual wine details variable. And then we're appending that wine details to this.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, what is
In
that?
the README,
object?
Sorry?
Sorry. I was just asking, what is that object import doing?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it gives. Oh crap! I forgot what it did off the top of my head.
Okay.
Does anybody remember by built-in Python object? Yeah, I forgot what it actually did. But yeah, it's a good question. I'll figure that out.
But it's something that we're always going to need.
Yeah, when you're doing the serializer for this, yeah.
what in the README it has a function decorator at property. What does that do?
So the at property. So again, we're gonna need to add property up here as well. I didn't get to that yet, but it essentially turns this method into a property. So notice here in the views where I'm calling all wines, I'm not invoking it like so. I'm not invoking it because normally if I'm calling a class method or an instance method, I'd have to invoke it. This property essentially allows us to call that all wines just like a property on the wine serializer. It does some other things.
Is that
go ahead.
Is that a Django thing or a Python thing for at property decorator?
I believe that's a Python thing. And it does some other things with getters and setters, but it's something you don't need to know about. And you don't necessarily need that. Like I can do that, but then I would have to invoke this.
I have a question.
Yep.
Why is all wines a method as opposed to just defining output as a dictionary?
Wait, say it one more time. Why is all wines a method as opposed to assigning output?
Yeah, it seems like the only thing that method does is hold that variable locally.
So yes, it only holds this variable, but what it's doing is it's extracting from a query set, which all like the wines is, and it's just converting it into a Python object. So that's what the purpose of this all wines method is doing. It's converting this wines query set on line 10, passing it into here. So it comes into the body as a query set, not a Python object. And this all wines converts that query set, each individual wine in that query set, into a Python object. And then it just returns the list of Python objects, which is a list of wines.
Yeah. Tom, for in output, that object where it's wines, colon, and then the array in serializers, is that because in views you have wines equals wine.objects.all? Is that why you have
no?
Or is there some correlation there?
No, like I can literally just make it like this as well and get rid of that. But then it would just be an array of wines as opposed to a list. So if I come over here, it would be, so up here, it's going to show like an object with wines and then an array. It's just so we can
Just like identify it a little easier?
identify what this list is in fact.
Okay.
So it's going to be
Gotcha.
a list of wines.
So we've got like the query set, the Python object, and then the JSON is kind of like the steps that we're doing right here.
Yes.
And what is driving that? Like, why is it coming in as a query set, and why do we need to send it out as a JSON?
So it's coming in as a query set because of when we query from the Django, like a Postgres database, it comes in as a query set, which is a different type of class. It's a query set. And the reason why we're turning it into a Python object is so when we pass it into the JSON response class can convert that Python object into a JSON format. I don't know if that answered your question.
And why does it need to be in a JSON?
So because you can't send like a Python object over HTTP. It's part of the protocol. You can only accept certain types of file form.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
All right. So we've got our wine list done. Let's go ahead and quickly create the wine detail, and we're gonna create another method on our wine serializer that's sole responsibility is to convert it to a single wine to a Python object. So def wine detail. This is should be familiar with this request. Takes in the wine ID. The wine equals wine dot objects dot get, where the ID equals the wine ID. So this is an individual wine query, like a query set of an individual wine. Now we're going to have to pass serialized wine equals wine serializer. We're passing in an individual wine query and doing wine detail. We're calling the wine detail method. So just like we did up here, we're going to create another method. We're going to do the app property to turn this method into a property, which you're able to call like we're doing here, instead of having to specifically invoke it. Wine properties. So def wine detail takes in self, and there we go. And now when we pass this wine up here, comes into here as the body, the self.body. That's all great. And now the only thing we have to return is a Python object. So we can literally just return something like this. I'm going to copy that down here. But instead of the wine, like I'm grabbing there, it's actually, because this wine and self.body, I can just call self.body.wine. Because when I'm passing in the wine in here, it's just being assigned to the body, self.body instance variable. So that's all I really pretty much have to do for that one. And then up here, return JSON response. Again, data equals serialized wine, status equals 200. So it's literally all we have to do for the serializers. And there is, so tomorrow, just an FYI, so we're doing this all manually. Django has some built-in serializer, a class serializer that does this all for us. It does all the heavy lifting for us, so we don't have to write all this code. But I just want to show you what we have to do in order to actually convert this query set into a Python object, and then the JSON response turns that Python object into a JSON format. So we're going to cover that tomorrow, though. So what questions do you have about the wine detail? And we can call this whatever we want. This wine detail and all wines. What questions do you have about that? All right, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Be back at. All right, so we created our wine list and our wine detail page. The next thing we need to do is create a new wine view. I'm going to bring that over here. Our new wine view method, our edit wine and delete wine. So first, I'm going to create a new wine, which takes in the request. And if you kind of recall, like you can say, hey, if the request dot method equals a post request, do something with that. So the first thing we need to do is, so say we're on React, we fill out a form, we click send. It comes over here to this new wine. And before, when we were using templates, we didn't have to convert that whatever was coming from the template down to this view. We didn't have to convert that. But when we're converting, or let me take a step back. Remember when we had to create a new article, when we created a fetch request and created a new article, created a post request for a new article. Inside of the body of the request, we had to do JSON stringify and stringify that JavaScript object into a JSON format. Do people recall that using in the news site challenge?
Yep.
Oh, cool. Yep. So it's coming over from JSON, like via, it's coming through the HTTP as like a JSON format. So, but again, we can't use JSON in here or JavaScript or anything. So we have to convert that into a Python object. So what we can do, we run data equals, that's what this JSON module is for. We need to convert that request into a Python object. So JSON has a method called load, has all their methods as well, that takes in that request and it converts that into a Python object. So that's what this is for. This converts that, that request into a Python object and assigns it to a variable called data. And then we take that data and we put it into a WineForm just to make sure that that works. Just make sure that, hey, all the data that is supposed to come through meets the requirements for that wine. So we have this WineForm, which we haven't yet created. And then we do run that, hey, if the form dot is valid, remember that we're testing of not whether or not that form is valid. We can say, take that wine form dot save. We're saving that form, or we're saving that data into the database. Commit equals true. So that right there, that just says, hey, save that data directly into the database. And then we need to have some response to the from the front end or to the front end. So we click save, create a new wine, comes back here to the back end, it validates it, converts it into a Python object, puts that Python object into the WineForm to make sure that that in fact is the correct data for that wine model. We're saying, hey, is that form valid? Yep. We're saving it to the database. Now we need to respond to the front end saying, hey, whether or not it was successful or not. So we have to then convert this wine back into a Python object and essentially serialize it. So we pretty much have to do what we did up here with the individual wine, come down here and do the same thing.
Hey, Tom, I don't know if you mentioned it already, but just a quick thought. How come we want to turn everything into a Python object? Like, what's the purpose of that? I don't know if you mentioned it already. Maybe I missed it.
So we need to convert it into a Python object so we can actually work with it in Python. So if it was a JavaScript object or some other type of object, we're working in Python, we couldn't do anything with it. So here we're saving the wine, and then we're just, again, serializing that wine, and then returning that wine as a JSON object again. But remember how I brought in this CSRF token whenever we save something to a form? We need to actually run this CSRF exempt, because it's going to check to see if there's a CSRF token attached to this form or to this request. And we don't have one, so we're going to have to do the CSRF exempt decorator. And then lastly, or the other one, we can do the edit wine, which is very similar. We can take in the request, the wine ID. The only difference is we grab that wine from the wine objects.get ID equals wine ID. And pretty much everything else is the same up here. The only difference, so I'm going to come up here. So everything else is the same, except when we put in the wine form, we want that instance of that wine. So it knows like, hey, this is already an instance of that wine.
So Tom, do you have to be cognizant of your different naming conventions, camel case and snake case between the two? Like do you need to be
between the front end and back end?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you only have to worry about it in certain locations. Usually it's on the front end is when you'll have a couple of instances where it's camel case. And I'm sorry, snake case. Because usually it's camel case in the front end in JavaScript. So when you're sending,
so you need to be sending it in the correct case because the backend needs it to be snake case.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't need to be, but yeah, there is definitely a point where it switches that you have to be like cognizant of it. I just ran into this yesterday or a couple days ago on a project I was working on in React Native. I had to like change the type to snake case because it was sending it to the backend, and the backend was Rails, which is snake cased. So yeah, there definitely has to be a point where it kind of switches. And then we can do the last one, or wait, we created this wine form here, but we didn't actually create that yet. So let's come over here inside our wines app on the same level as their views, URLs, serializers, and models. We're going to create, is it just what did I call it up here? Yeah, just a form, edit, forms.py. And then that, here, we're just going to say, hey, from Django, import the forms. And then from the models, import the wine model. And we're going to create a class just called WineForm that inherits from the forms module. Or it's going to be a model form because it's a form specific to a model in our database. And remember, it says class meta. What's the name of the model? It's going to be our wine model. And what fields do we want in that for that form? So we'll have the wine name, the price, the varietal, and the description. I think that looks right. Okay. So that's our wine form for the wine model. This is all, we can add the ID on here if we wanted to, but let's not do that. questions on creating that form? Yep, someone. All right. And the very last one, so we created it, edit wine. The last one is to delete the wine. So let's do CSRF exempt, def, delete wine, takes in the request, the wine ID, and we can grab that wine, or I'm sorry, if the request dot method equals post, we're going to grab that wine out of the database, wine dot objects dot get ID equals wine ID. And then we can just do wine dot delete. So we're deleting that wine from the database. And the last thing we need to do is return the JSON response. And then the data, this is where we can usually would pass in the serialized wine, but we can just pass in anything we want. So such as like message or something. You successfully deleted the wine, and then like the status equals 200.
Tom, I have a question.
Yep.
So like on lines 26 and 37, why are we, if they're sending a post request to update or create a new wine, why would we send them the data back?
That's just kind of what we want to do. We want to, once we save the wine, we want to resend that wine back. We can actually send whatever we want. We can send like a message like, hey, successfully created wine. It's just kind of what we want to do.
Okay.
So here I didn't just deciding. I can also, just like I'm doing down here, I can just say like, you successfully created the wine, but I want to send that wine back. So they might want to do something, might reroute to the actual wine page, the wine detail page, or something like that.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
One thing real quick with that, typically what gets sent back is the entire object. You created a wine, it didn't have an ID. Once you push it into the database, it gets its ID and you're pushing that ID back. So that can help you re-render any objects that need that ID. So you can actually navigate to the completed page of wine. Because previous, without the ID, you don't have the ability to do that.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
So is there not much difference between the post and the put request for the edit wine function?
Yeah, the only difference is the actual wine the instance of the wine that we're editing. So here we're actually grabbing that wine and editing it. Like,
so you could use it as a put request instead of a post.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, you could do that. And so when you're in your front end, when you're doing a fetch request in the headers, you have the headers, then you have the method, you can put there if you wanted to. Yeah.
Okay, and then there wouldn't be any other difference in the function to make it a put request other than that.
Yeah, I don't think so. Cool. All right. Cool. So that is it for that. But now let's actually go ahead and test this. I actually don't know if this is going to work. Like, I'm sure there might be errors in it, but so let's just go ahead and test it. So what's the first thing I need to do? What's something I didn't do yet?
Start the server.
Start the server.
Migrate.
Yep,
Make
there we go.
migration.
Yep, all of the above. So Python manage.py make migrations. So did it create one? Oh, cool. All right. Created the model. Now I need to migrate. Python manage.py migrate. Cool. Applied that. I'm going to clear that. Now you can run the server. Python manage.py run server. All right. Cool. It seems like it's working. Obviously, it's working. So let's actually go ahead and see if I can use Postman to make some request. All right. What is, I don't want to update that now. So I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to go to localhost. What is it? 8,000 /wines. All right. So look at, I'm actually getting a response back. So right here, I just went to /wines. So it looks like it's working kind of. So what it did. All right. Come here. I went to /wines. I went to the wine list, came up here to the wine list, ran wine.objects.all. There's no wines in the database yet. So it serialized it. There's nothing there. Sent that serialized data back. If I come over here, notice how this is the only thing that's actually being sent. I'm having an object that has wines with an empty list. And notice I have wines in an empty list. So let's go ahead and try to use Postman to create a wine, a new wine. So I'm going to come up here, wine/new. I believe that's what it is. Yeah, so right there, it's supposed to be a post request. And in the body, I'm going to do some raw JSON. And here I'm just writing wine name. Does anybody have a favorite wine name?
Pinot Noir.
Kirkland.
Kirkland?
Yeah, it's really good. I'm not kidding.
I'm going to do Dearly Beloved. I think that's the only wine
Expensive stuff.
I remember from Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's has good, cheap wine. Wine name. Yeah. So what was it? The wine, the price. I think this wine at Trader Joe's is like $7.99 or something. What was it? Variety. So did I spell that right? Varietal. I don't even know.
I think it's VAR.
I had to look that up earlier. I didn't know what it meant.
And then IET.
Where the hell did my code go? All right, there we go. Don't want to mess that up. Where's my Postman? This is a red blend. And description. So if I spell any of these wrongs, it probably won't work. This is yummy. All right.
Hey, that's Anker's line.
What? This is yummy, yummy? Is it?
He always says like a description of yummy when he's talking about his donuts.
Okay. Where? All right. Where the hell is my code? I want to see that database. Here it is. All right. So come over here. I just want to see the terminal. So if we use Postman, you'll see the response up here. If it looks like HTML, it's probably a bad response. And you can kind of see here in the server, so you can see the actual request come through in the server. I want to get rid of that. There we go. And the headers, it's just the default headers from Postman. I wouldn't mess with this at all because it'll mess up. So I'm going to send that through. All right, see, cool. So I got a response back. This is yummy nummy. It says, and that was like get wines, and then here's that post wines, the wine/new HTTP 101 1.1. It's a 200 request. Awesome. Now, if I wanted to grab all the wines now up here, I can do / it's going to be a get request. I'm sending this. There's nothing in the body because a get request doesn't do anything here. But here I get that all wines like so. And if I actually go back here and do a hard refresh, I get all the wines right there like so. Pretty cool. And so if I wanted to do that again, post new, there we go. Organic earth. I think that's another cheap wine. I like reds. It's actually a Cabernet, but and if I send that through, cool. I've got that one. If I refresh up here, I've got that second wine. So it looks good so far. I can update a wine. So I can, if I want to view an individual wine, so let's view that individual wine by doing a get request. So I've got Dearly Beloved. I can do the same thing up here. There's Dearly Beloved. If I wanted to update that wine or edit, that is a post request. Let's say it is $10.99. Let's see. Post. Oh wait, this is organic earth. So I'm just going to copy this over here. And let's just say this is $10.99 now. Send. There we go. I got that response back. Now it's $10.99. Cool. Let's just add one more and see if the four hands, is it left hands? Body send new. Cool. Now, if I wanted to view that wine and send it, what happened? So it looks like I didn't get, so I need to make it a get request. There's four hands. If I wanted to do a delete, I can do post / delete, send that through. Did delete not work? Let's see what happened.
Don't you have to change it to a delete request in Postman?
No, because I created because the view is a post. Maybe if it goes like that. Let's see. JSON response, data delete. Let's just see if this works. Maybe it did delete it, but maybe the response I got back. Okay, it's still there. So here, wines 3. Just do a get request just to make sure it's still there. So there it is. I'm going to make it post. Delete. Wonder if it's because there's stuff in the body. All right. Why isn't that working? Let's see what the error says. It should say down here. So it says type object wine has no attribute object. Oh, see right there? There's my error. So let's try that one more time. There we go. It says you successfully deleted the wine. Now, if I go to try to view that wine again, I don't get anything. There's nothing there. If I wanted to go view that, does not exist, wine 3. So maybe I should have some error handling on here. If there isn't a wine 3, it returns like wine does not exist or something. But that's that. What questions do you have about making the Django app as an API?
Since you can't see the ID of the wines, what would be the fastest way to be able to see them so you know which one you want to delete? Because I know if you create 10 and then you delete like the second one, then on your list, like the first one, the second one will actually be ID 3 and stuff like that.
So here in the wine details, you can say ID and add an ID to it.
Would that be a self-made ID or the primary key from the table?
That'd be the primary key from the table.
Okay.
So if I come over here and say 2 now and click send, see now I see how I've got the wine ID right there.
Okay.
And likewise, if I refresh this, it's going to have a wine ID right there. So that's how you can just add the ID. You can just extract it from the query set. Yeah, good question. I'm glad you brought that up.
And that was from the forms file, correct?
No, that's actually from the serializer. So in here in the serializer, when you're extracting what information you want from the query set and turning it into a Python object, this is where you would do it inside the serializer. Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. What other questions do you have?
Are we going to be going over model serializers?
No, not right now. No.
Google it.
So Tom, this is the way that we'll like do it manually ourselves, and then tomorrow we're gonna learn the Django REST framework.
Yeah, you're gonna see how to make this into like a 3-liner. Yeah, but I just want to show you what is actually happening underneath the hood, and you can use this going forward if you like, because Django REST frameworks does a lot of heavy lifting, but you don't really know what's going. What?
No, finish your sentence.
Oh no, but you don't really. So the reason why we teach it like this, so you kind of see what's actually happening, where Django REST framework takes care of almost everything. All right, so now that we have our app built, we're done. Now, a lot of like once you actually build an app, it's like great. Now, where do I like host it? And so I can send it out to people and people can try it out and stuff like that. So the easiest way to do it is through a hosting company called Heroku. There's also like Netify, I think, but yeah, there's a bunch of different ones, but Heroku makes it very easy. So if you go to Heroku.com, whoop, it's actually, so here's Heroku. Here are mine apps, but let's actually sign out. Oh yeah, wasn't Heroku purchased by Salesforce? Yep, they were. I totally forgot about that. So yeah, Heroku is a cloud service provider, very similar to like AWS and all of that, but AWS obviously has so many more products, but Heroku has a lot of different products as well. A lot of companies host their websites on Heroku or their applications on Heroku. But what's nice about Heroku is that it has a free tier that allows a user to host up to, I think, 5 different applications on their account for free. So Heroku is a really nice, convenient way to host your application. So I'm just gonna log in. So right now I've got, oh great, I need Authenticator. So yeah, it needs like a cool. So all this stuff is in the lecture for today, but I'm going to go through the process to set up your app for it to be deployable to Heroku. So I'm just going to close all these files. So the first thing we need to do is create a file. Actually, I'm going to go to say how to deploy app to Heroku. Maybe the official documentation comes up. Actually, I'm going to go GitHub November Platoon, week 9, day 8. So if I scroll all the way down, here's everything. So going to follow the official docs. There's 3 things you kind of need to do. First is create a new file called proc file. So I'm inside my wine application right here. And on the same level, what does it say? So at the root of your directory, which is the same file as your manage.py file, we need to create a file called proc file with no extension, just proc file. Again, this is on the same level as your manage.py file. Don't forget that, because we have students make this file in various different locations, whether it's in the actual app or anywhere, but it's got to be at the same level as your manage.py file. And then we need to put this code, there's a single line, web : Gunicorn, and then the name of my project .wsgi. So the name of this project is Wine API, and I'm going to save it. And that's literally all I have to do for that file. And then the next thing we need to do is pip install Gunicorn or Gunicorn or whatever. Whoop. So next, I created that proc file. I added that single line of code. Now I need to pip install inside my virtual environment Gunicorn. So it's going to install it. Cool. Requirement already satisfied. Whatever. So if I scroll down here, so the next thing I need to do is pip install Django Heroku. So coming down here, I'm going to clear it. Pip install Django Heroku. So there's already a library that makes deploying Django apps pretty easy to Heroku. So there, I'm done with that. And again, all this stuff is right here as well. So then add the following import statement at the very top of my settings.py file. So import Django _Heroku. So inside my wine API settings directory, at the very top, the first line, import Django Heroku. And then at the very bottom of the line, at the very bottom of the settings.py file, add this Django Heroku settings local. Whoop. So if I scroll all the way down to the very bottom, Django Heroku, like so. So what questions do you have about that process so far? So we created a proc file. We installed Gunicorn. We installed pip install Django Heroku. We added import Django Heroku at the very top of the settings file and Django Heroku.settings locals at the very bottom of the file. Does anybody have any questions on that? All right. And the last thing we need to do is pip freeze. So we actually have to create our txt file by running pip freeze requirements.txt. I'm going to clear that. So pip freeze requirements.txt. And there we go. We have our requirements.txt file that has Django, Django Heroku, Gunnercore, and Psycop G2, and some other stuff. Great. Next, we actually have to create a Django or create an app on Heroku. So I've got a couple from last cohort, Wine front end and Wine back end. So I already created an account. I'm up here. So under my personal account, it says new, create new app. And this app name has to be unique. So I'm just gonna call it November Wine Backend, because this is the back end of our app, or I can call it Wine API. Yeah, let's actually call it Wine API. And it says, oh, this is available, great. And now I'm gonna create that app. Cool. And there's a couple of things you can do. You can deploy it using the Heroku command line, which we're gonna do. You can connect this. If this was connected to a GitHub repository, you can actually connect your Heroku app to a GitHub repository. So anytime you push to your GitHub repository, it automatically deploys and to your Heroku app. So you can do that, or you can use, I don't know, this container registry. I'm not quite sure what this is. But we're going to use the Heroku command line to do this. And the steps here are pretty straightforward. So the first thing we're going to do is run Heroku login in the terminal. So I'm going to clear here. I'm going to run Heroku login. It's going to say press any key to open up the browser to log into Heroku. So I'm going to press any key, comes over here, log into Heroku command line interface, log in. Cool, I'm logged in. I can exit out of that window and come back over here. Notice how it says logging in. I'm logged in as tapreet.com, which is my email address for this account. And next thing I need to do, I need to CD into my project, which I think I'm already CD'd into my project. So I'm already inside the wine project right there. And I need to git init. So I'm initializing a new Git repository. Git init. Cool. I initialized a new Git repository. The next thing I need to do is, I actually skipped a step. I should have created a git ignore file up here. So I'm going to actually go ahead and do that now. So .git ignore. And I want to add my VE, my virtual environment, and the Pi cache. It's not required, but that's good to add this in there for the git ignore. So I just created a git ignore file at the same level as my manager.py requirements and proc file. So going back to actually deploying, I initialized a new Git repository. I'm just following the documentation. The next thing I need to do is Heroku git remote. Just copy this command. All right, so set git remote Heroku to, so I'm actually, this is like a new Git repository, but it's on like Heroku app. So git.heroku.com/November or -November wine API. Cool. So I initialized a new Git repository on Heroku. Now I can just do git add just like we normally do. Git commit, I can do a commit message. Cool, so I did all that. And now I can do git push Heroku master, which is deploying, gonna automatically kick off the deployment of this. So git push Heroku master. And so it's pushing to Heroku master, and it's gonna automatically start building this application and deploying it. So it might take a few minutes, but yep. What questions do you have about that process?
What if your project already has a repo initiated on GitHub?
That's fine. You just have to reinitialize it on Heroku. I think the Heroku one just initializes it on the Heroku. I think there's actually yeah, I think you just do existing Git repository for existing repository, simply add Heroku in front of it. Or what you can do is connect via GitHub, so you can do that as well. So you just put the name of that repo on GitHub, wherever it is located on GitHub. And so every time you deploy or you push to GitHub, it will automatically deploy it to Heroku. All right, all right, so looks like it installed everything correctly. Here it goes, compressing, it's launching. It says, hey, at https novemberwineapi.com is deployed to Heroku. So now I can actually visit that, follow link, open up. It says method not allowed. Oh, that's the Git. So it's right here. So if I click that, open, and there we go. And notice how here, there's nothing here. And if I go to /wines, programming error at wines does not exist. So why doesn't wines exist right now?
There's no database remotely, right?
There is a database, but what haven't we done to the database?
Migrated it?
Yep. We haven't migrated anything. So we can just do Heroku run Python manage.py migrate. So anytime you want to run commands in the Heroku server, just do Heroku run followed by the normal Python commands. So it's Python manage.py migrate on that Wine API application. So it's running, applying all migrations. So it might take a little bit. Cool. So now if I come back here, there we go. We're on Heroku Wines app. We're up here and we're getting a response from our deployed application. Oop.
So is Heroku still using Postgres as a database or SQLite?
Postgres. It's actually using Amazon S3 or Amazon. It's actually Heroku utilizes AWS on their backend. So you can actually figure out which AWS, where your app's running on the server on AWS if you really want to. But so yeah, it's using Postgres. So now let's actually create some wines using Postman. But instead of going localhost 8000, we can go to the HTTPS November, go to this URL and say new. And I can create a post there, click send. And now I'm at Heroku.com, wines. There we go. We've got Jose. Oh, look at that. Jose's secret sauce already posting there. Nice. So yeah, anybody can literally post to this stuff now. So this is deployed on the web, on the internet. You can visit there. And so I'll post it in the chat. So
secret ingredient is love.
Yeah. So I posted it in the November Slack channel. So you can all go use Postman or to actually make requests to there, like new requests, edit requests, etc.
What would be the safeguard for when it comes to our projects and not letting people post stuff?
Have a user login. It's rarely ever an actual issue. I know people are always like worried about like, oh, my project's online. I don't want people bombing it, but in reality, that never ever happens. Oh, what happened? So if I look over here, if I refresh this, if you ever want to open your app from Heroku, you can just click open app and it opens up here. And you can go to wines like so. And also, if you want to create like a super user, so you can make edits. So inside of your admin, so like up here, you can do Heroku run Python manage.py, create super user. And so I'm creating a super user on the Heroku server. So
Without that, I'm sorry. Without that, could you not make edits?
I'm sorry, without that, can you not
Without
make?
creating without creating a super user, could you not make your own edits?
You can't use the admin dashboard. So this is why I'm creating a super user, just so I can use the admin dashboard. So tom@email.com. So yeah, this allows us to use the admin dashboard in Heroku. So if I come over here, instead of going to wines, and I want to do admin, here's TA preet, 1, 2, 3. And there we go. I've got all of that. But it's like, oh crap, hold on a second. I wanted to add a dashboard for the wines in here. So does anybody remember how to add the wine model to?
Add it to your admin file.
Yeah, let's see. Let's try to do that and see if that works. Why doesn't that show up? All right, so I'm going to come over here and inside my wines admin file, I can say, hey, from .models import wine, and then I can do admin.site.register wine. So I changed that. Great. But when I come back up here and I do a refresh, it's not up here because that my application hasn't been deployed to Heroku yet. So here I can just do git add everything, git status. So I modified the wines, and I can just pretty much repeat that process. Where'd it go? So Heroku git clone, I can clone that down, cd into my wine, so I can commit. So git, I'll say like added wine to admin dashboard. Then was a Heroku push or git push Heroku master. So what that's going to do, it's going to rebuild the entire application and redeploy it. So it's going to go through that entire process of building it. So it says like, hey, Python app detected. There we go. It's fine. So it's installing the requirements file. So right now, if you tried to probably visit my app, it might not work right now because it's currently deploying. Cool. So if I come back here and go to, I'm just going to close all this stuff out. And open up my app again. If I go to admin / admin, there we go. Now we've got wines. And you can see the 2 wines that are already in the database. And here you can add more wines if you wanted to. Good. I can save there. Then if I actually wanted to go to wines again, there I've got 3 wines. What questions do you have about deploying to Heroku? I just can't emphasize enough. Okay, we create that proc file on the same level as the manage.py, adding your Django project name right here. And then inside of your settings.py file, add this Django Heroku up there, and also add it at the very bottom. Pip freeze requirements. You also have to install Django Heroku and Gunicorn. Create your get ignore file, and then just follow through the instructions on how to deploy via the command line. If I wanted to, you can create a repo on your GitHub and just connect it straight to your GitHub if you wanted to. So what questions do you have about any of that process?
Are we going to be hosting our React projects on here too?
Yep. So notice how I have the Wine API up here. This is last code. It's the Mike's front end.
And they don't care if you use npm for your package manager?
Nope.
Because when we were doing the hackathon, I tried to use Vercel. I just kind of blasted it on there, and they specifically needed you to use yarn, and they asked me to delete my package.json and stuff like that.
You shouldn't have to. I mean, yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I've deployed to Heroku using npm, unless they've changed their thing. So you can kind of see right here. Here's the overview of the November Wine API app. So I'm using Heroku Postgres. I'm on the hobby dev plan, and you can kind of see the different stuff that's different things about your app. Like here are the different activities. So I successfully made a build, and I deployed it twice, and you can kind of see the different resources used. So I'm using the Postgres database. So yeah, you can kind of see different stuff about your database. There is actually an actual way to, right here. Is this it? So yeah, this is actually where my database is being hosted at. Amazon's AWS right here. It's got an EC2 instance on it. So yeah. Oh. But yeah, you can see all this information. About your app. If you ever want to delete it, you can come down here and delete it. All right. And that is how you deploy an app to Heroku.